Welcome back to Franciscan University Presents. We've been talking to Dr. Paul Crawford, professor and author, about the Crusades. This is our final segment, Regis, so could you start off our kind of summations?
Oh, gosh. There's a great many things that I'd like to say, but, and not the least of them is a gesture of gratitude and thanksgiving to you for having come. You exhibit a learned enthusiasm, which I find infectious. I'd love to have been one of your students. Of course, I'd be much older than you, but I would find your material highly contagious. And I'm struck by that word gratitude, because in the break before this final session, you mentioned, and it's haunted me, this image of going home to God and being sort of accosted by your ancestors who want to know, what did you do to advance the cause of Christendom? And you know, if your hands are empty, maybe you didn't do anything, but at least in the classroom, you can give witness to the truth. And the truth, in the end, I think, will vindicate you before the councils of eternal judgment. Another point, Chesterton speaks of the democracy of the dead, that we ought to give votes to the most obscure of all classes, our ancestors in the faith. We owe them something, some deference. And I think by telling the truth about what they did, that I think is the tribute we pay to their memory, and we keep it alive. And one particular memory I have, which came to mind in the course of preparing for this show, was something my great friend and mentor, Fritz Wilhelmsen, did. He was an assistant professor at the University of Santa Clara in California in the mid-1950s, when the Budapest uprising took place. And he spoke to the student body and galvanized about 1,400 of them to sign on as crusaders, to go to Hungary to help their brothers lift this yoke of Soviet tyranny. Of course, he was refused by the State Department. We don't need you. And the Eisenhower administration wasn't going to do a damn thing to help Hungary. But for Fritz, that was a kind of flashpoint. It indicated that America was not really interested in liberating these captive peoples. And that's very different from the attitude that motivated our Christian forebears. They were determined to do something, and by God, they succeeded in some modest yet measurable way to make life more hospitable to Christians in the places where, after all, their faith had been founded.
Thank you, Regis. Scott?
You know, I'm reminded of the homilist who gets up to give a homily on ignorance and apathy. And he says, the two biggest problems in the parish are what? And the fellow in the front row leans over, I don't know and I don't care. I would add a third one, and that is ingratitude. You know, I do think the ingratitude is great. I hope and pray that the ignorance is far greater, and I suspect that it is. But debunking this myth, I think, is really become something big, and not just for me, but for all people who are on the side of truth. You know, and not just historical truth, but I mean contemporary circumstances. Historical truth is important in itself to clarify the record and to get it right, and to go back and to recognize these are wars of defense, that these are just wars, these are justifiable wars. Abuses were committed, you know, and all of that, but not quite like what we did, you know, at Dresden and other things too. And yet we celebrate our veterans rightly. At the same time, we acknowledge some excesses. But, you know, Samuel Huntington speaks of the bloody borders of Islam, and how the vast majority of all of the major conflicts that still go on are, you know, in Islamic countries. And it's not a coincidence. It's a fact of history, and it's a moral reality that we have to face, you know. And when we do the historical work, I think we pull back the ivy, and we suddenly are looking at, what is this? It's the front door into a Christian Catholic way of understanding social order and, you know, Western history. And it's not coming too soon, you know. This rediscovery, I think, is going to reawaken in us a desire to go back and get history right, but also to get the present and the future right as well, and to recognize that there is a time and a place to fight. And, you know, there is a time and a place for gratitude as well. Your work, and I know Mike is going to mention this is available on Faith and Reason, that article on the 4 myths is indispensable reading. But what you've recommended in the works of Jonathan Riley Smith, especially this book, The Crusades, Christianity and Islam, I gave it to my 19-year-old and he devoured it, you know, and my kids are all reading it. And so thank you. Keep up the great work and let's just share the load.
Yeah.